Yes,
hello. You're a very dutiful group of people. Thank you. So I'm Kim Hagelman, as I said before. Now I'm standing up for.
Yes, I'm so glad. Are you doing well?
I'm doing fine, thank you. It's the I have a new knee, and the standing up and sitting down part is still a little bit crunchy. So my responsibility on the board is to manage and schedule our programs on Wednesdays. And it's been a lot of fun, and we've met lots of great people. And I do appreciate that many of you take the time to fill out the survey that you get when the last bite is chewed. That survey comes really fast. But do take time, because I look at those every month and try to follow up on things that you're reacting to, comments you've made, thoughts you have about speakers and programs that you'd like to hear. I think we've had a good variety of programs lately. So before I introduce Hal, he moved on me. Let me just tell you about a couple things that are coming up. So in March, our March program is going to be, we've invited the folks from WNC Nonprofit Pathways to be with us. If you don't know who they are, they're a fabulous resource for us in our community. It's an opportunity for us to learn more about what they do, what their resources are, and for them to also talk to us about the kinds of needs we have as nonprofit leaders in our community that might be something they could follow up on. So please plan to come next month. And I think next month is the Bring a Friend reschedule for January. So it's a great deal. Bring a friend. You don't have to pay for them. You just want them to be here. We will outgrow this space, I'm sure. We kind of anticipate at least 75, maybe up to 100 people. Pay attention to the material that's coming out. We're in here because they're remodeling upstairs. So we will see you next month. We don't know where. We'll let you know. The other thing that's happening in March is David Heinen from the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits is doing a series of town hall meetings in collaboration with who? Somebody.
Pathways, yeah.
Okay. But on March 9th, and we're going to post this on the website, I would encourage you to go, because he's going to be talking about some of the new tax laws and how they might apply, how they're going to affect nonprofits, how they're going to affect donors. I think it would be well worth our time to go hear what he has to say. So that'll be on our website as well. So 2 opportunities in March for you for education and networking, and I would encourage that. What else did I need to announce? Anything? I'm good? I guess that's it. So it is my pleasure to introduce Hal Lewis. I was going to read this whole bio, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to tell you a story about why he's here. And it has to do with Alex Comfort. So, you know, it's the Alex Comfort moment that we've all had from time to time when Alex says, hey, I know this guy. And so he said to me, hey, I met this guy, and you need to meet him. And about the same time that happened, I got this email from this guy who said, Alex Comfort told me I needed to meet you. And I, you know, I've had these moments with Alex in the past and kind of thought, oh boy, here we go. Not too sure what to do with this. But I thought I could at least take the time to have a cup of coffee with this guy. Well, I had a cup of coffee with Hal and thought, what a great resource and presence and professional he is going to bring into our group. So we're thrilled that he's now he's not quite bi-coastal, he's kind of bi-residential. He's got a home in Chicago, he's got a home here in Fairview. So I have a feeling I hope we get to know Hal and really welcome him into our midst. Hal comes to us from kind of the academic world. He's the president and CEO of an institute in Chicago. But today he's going to be talking to us about leadership and how we interact as executives with our board and what that relationship is all about. I think it's something all of us, we all have to do it. We all work with boards, we're nonprofit people, and we've got some board members here, so you guys speak up when he's doing his presentation, but I'm really thrilled that Hal's with us and give him your attention, so come on up. I will say, if you are in a chair and you cannot see him, he's going to be right here, pick your chair up and scoot it someplace where you can see. Okay?
Thanks, Kim. Yeah, I think that's especially going to be an issue for some of you guys here. The screen is here, and when I was standing back there, I couldn't see it at all. So much of the presentation will be built around PowerPoint. So feel free to move around. Thank you, everyone, for this opportunity. I want to say thank you in particular to Kim, the aforementioned Alex, and to Wilson, who have been over the course of the past year or so very kind to me in introducing me to colleagues in Western North Carolina. As Kim alluded to, I've had a home in Fairview for the past 4 years, but I've primarily been based in Chicago. Beginning this summer, I hope to be spending more of my time down here. I've recently been asked to join the teaching and training faculty for the Center for Creative Leadership in Greensboro, and I will be expanding my own organizational consulting firm, Leadership for Impact, in the Asheville area. And so what I hope is, if not today, that over time I'll get to meet some of you, to learn with you, and to be able to join the community going forward. I'm very pleased with the opportunity to present this afternoon, and as I hope you will see, I stand with you as a colleague. I have both been in the trenches of nonprofit organizational management and leadership, and have a foot in the academic world. I say nothing today that I haven't learned from as a practitioner as well as an academic, and I could tell just by the introductions that there's a great likelihood I will be reaffirming what you already know, rather than teaching this group something from scratch. But I have this wonderful opportunity to share some things related to how to create healthy relationships between nonprofit professionals and their boards and committees. It's no secret to anybody in this room that the halls of nonprofit organizations across this country are too often littered with executives and board members who fail to learn how to work together. Not only is this kind of conflict the 800-pound gorilla that's in the room that we all know is there, but none of us want to deal with, but learning how to work with boards and executives is the single greatest challenge for nonprofit organizations that we face in achieving the impact. Well, you can't really, it's a little too high up, but this is called partnering for impact. And we don't have the impact that our organizations want to have unless we get this right. Now, those of you, thank you, that's great. Those of you who've been doing this for a while know that this situation is not new. As far back as 1982, the Harvard Business Review wrote that conflict between executive directors and trustees is all too common in not-for-profit organizations, especially in middle-sized and small nonprofits where, get ready for this, as if you didn't know it, differences may become personal. Here, though this particular quotation talks about executives, The reality is it happens anywhere up and down the organizational infrastructure, where if we can't get this right, we will not be able to have the impact our organizations stand for and purport to want to have. The reason I call this session Partnering for Impact is very simply this, that we who toil in the vineyards of nonprofit organizations are in the impact business. We don't make widgets. We don't sell iPhone 10s. We don't measure our success with quarterly sales reports alone. We are in the business of having an impact, and the money that we development professionals raise help our enterprises do just that, to have the impact that we want to have. And as we know, and as you could tell just from the introductions at the beginning of this lunch, those impacts span a broad continuum, from education and science to arts and culture and health organizations, from faith-based enterprises to advocacy and social justice groups. Simply stated, when nonprofit staff and their volunteer committees and boards do not work well together, that is to say, when they look like this and not like this, our ability to achieve the missions we are dedicated to, that is to have the impact we want to have, is seriously compromised. When that happens, we run the risk of what I would call a communal brain drain, in which dedicated volunteers and talented professionals turn away from the nonprofit arena, where they are desperately needed, in favor of other interests. Each of us in the room likely knows individuals with huge amounts of talent that after a while get fed up with working with, you fill in a blank, volunteer trustees or talented professionals. And what happens is the sector that needs talent the most, our sector, ends up losing it as we send people through the revolving door that sends them away from being a dedicated volunteer, or in many of the cases of our colleagues, sends them through a revolving door right into the corporate sector. We cannot tolerate this, and we have to begin, I would argue, with a recognition of the fact that there is a correlation between getting this relationship right and our sector's ability to maintain first-rate professionals and volunteers. We can talk all we want about, gee, we wish we had better volunteers, or gee, we wish we had better professionals. But if we can't figure out how to work together, we're pretty well signing the death warrant of talented people staying in the business. In 2007, Brandeis University conducted a study of development officers, professional fundraisers. And here's what the study found. A meaningful, clearly defined relationship with lay leaders is a major factor in job satisfaction. So when boards wonder what's happening to their talented professionals, part of what we have to tell them is it's about the way we relate to one another. It's about the way we partner, not the way we micromanage. It's about the way we work together, playing to the best talents we each bring to the table. A more recent study in March of 2017 by an organization called The Leading Edge, which works with nonprofit CEOs, said this: at the core of a healthy organization is a strong lay professional partnership. When the board and staff are in sync with one another, complementing each other's efforts, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. But if they are not in harmony, the organization suffers greatly. This is the reality that we know of in our field, but as I said at the beginning, too often it's the 800-pound gorilla that is sitting there that we never want to talk about. How wonderful if we were doing a session like this with more than just a handful of board members, but where professionals and board members were really sitting and unpacking some of these issues. So we're going to pretend that that's what we have. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to run this little experiment. When we were in the room with round tables, I had this masterfully planned out. Now, except for you guys back there, the rest of you have to help me a little bit. So we have to form little groups at our table, at our smaller tables, like, and 50% of you I am going to ask to play the role of a nonprofit executive. In this room, that won't be hard. The other 50% of you I'm going to ask to play the role of a nonprofit board member. Except in a couple of cases, that will be some role play. And I want you to talk to each other in character in an effort to answer the following question. What are the key areas of conflict or sources of tension between you and your executive, if you're playing the part of a nonprofit board member, or your board, if you are playing the part of a nonprofit executive? Everybody get the assignment? Not that hard to do, I hope. Let's spend a couple of minutes again in character, talking to each other. Go.
You're nothing.
No, I'll be executive. I want to be a board.
I'll be a board.
What ED you are, they can be the
What are the key areas of conflict?
What Amy is in ED.
He is my.
We've already been there for a while.
I've wanted him to so, I'll tell you right, what my source of tension.
A lot of us got
say that.
So what is our role? First of all, I want to thank you for bringing this up and leading I really appreciate it. It's a great opportunity. So like
Go ahead and say it because
Okay, guys. Ladies and gentlemen. You're the one that's folks, thank you. So I know I did something. No, it's good, and it's a good thing. The definition of a dilemma is when you get robust conversation underway and Kim tells you 1:30, got to be done by 1:30. So my homage to Kim and to actually all of you, because I'd rather you want to do this more, is to hit the pause button on the conversation with a very strong recommendation, and you'll see how this is going to play out going forward. You know, a lot of times where you see something like a daredevil, like a NASCAR race, like a motorcycle, like the Olympics, and it always comes with the warning, don't try this at home. Okay, I'm telling you to try this at home, right? This kind of opportunity, now if we had more time, we would go over the rules of active listening. I know this is a group people know about active listening. And so these kinds of conversations between volunteers and professionals are exactly a step in this process. In the meantime, we have some research on this issue of sources of tension between volunteers and professionals, and I want to share some of it with you. If anybody wants source citations, follow up with me afterwards. What I tried to do is, sort of in the interest of time, was to amalgamate a series of analyses on professionals and board members to sort of take you through this. By the way, it does not hurt my feeling. I know we're recording this. I don't know what the purpose is, but it doesn't hurt my feelings if afterwards somebody wants to, take a picture of a slide for further discussion back in your own workplaces, because that's where this stuff is going to get fixed.
We can post that.
Okay, great. So when this slide is fully up, I think you'll see some things. So there are a number of analyses of nonprofit executives and trustees or board members. And when we ask professionals, executives throughout the enterprise, what are the significant areas of conflict and sources of tension you experience with your boards? Here's what we hear. Board members don't share information sufficiently for me to do my job. Professionals often complain about what they term board member micromanagement. Anybody here? There's a bunch of nodding heads. I feel like it's a bobblehead convention, right? Board members, professionals often tell other professionals and researchers aren't prepared or are unprepared for the jobs they're asked to do. Board members, professionals say, have a need for an excessive amount of stroking. We write their speeches for them, we're complimenting them ad nauseum without end, so on and so forth. Professionals often report that board members frequently challenge our authority. We are the professionals, and yet we are frequently undercut or sabotaged by challenges to our authority. Board members, professionals say, don't value the work of the professionals. More often, they treat us like hired help. Do this, get this done, make sure the room is set up. Professionals, not surprisingly, report a much more heightened sense of vulnerability and job insecurity in partnership or in would-be partnership with their trustees. And finally, board members, professionals report that board members fail to respect personal professional boundaries. Something like, I cannot even go to the supermarket with the kids without running up to one of my board members in the cereal aisle who wants to discuss a meeting last week. I'm with the kids. When we ask board members sources of tension and areas of conflict with their professional staff, here are some of the most frequently reported comments. Professionals don't share the information we need to do our jobs as good board members. Secondly, trustees often complain that professionals overstep their areas of responsibility. We're the board members. Professionals are running the whole place. Professionals, we are told by some number of board members, often lack competence. They fail to fulfill their responsibilities, or they perform their work unprofessionally. In the 21st century, we are told, we need more than the stereotypical social worker running after nonprofits if we're going to compete in the marketplace. And finally, in an interesting analog to the bottom of the professionals column, volunteers often report that professionals are not as accessible to them as they would desire. Are you kidding me? I work all day in my practice at my business so I can earn enough money to be a generous contributor, and in between I have to answer all sorts of emails from the charitable organization on which I serve. I finally get home from a hard day at the office, gobble down dinner, and call my development professional, and somehow I get the impression she's tied up putting her kids to bed. It's my downtime too. While there's much more to say about this, not today because I have a 1:30 end, there is, no, I think, by the way, I do the same thing.
You can say that one more time, it'll be 1:25.
So, hopefully not. Hopefully we can get through this. So I believe that there are 4 things we should be thinking about as professionals and or as board members if we would like to fix some of this. And believe me, I come bearing the stripes of being a communal professional for many years. I am not naive Hal here. I do not propose anything as if it's a magic bullet solution. We work at this, and we'll work at it again. And many of us have been working at it over the course of our careers. But over time, I do believe if we can add these 4 things to our repertoire, we can really make a difference in building changed relationships. So let me introduce them to you and hopefully touch on each of the 4, even just briefly. The first thing we need to do if we would like to change the caliber of relationship between volunteers and professionals in contemporary nonprofits is to have a willingness to embrace collaboration as an organizational core value. Core value is different than lip service. We'll get back to that. Second is to create a system in which there is clarity regarding expectations and boundaries for both the volunteers and the professionals in the organization. Third, we need to build organizations predicated upon a system of regular communication that is informed by transparency, candor, and trust. And fourth, somewhat counterintuitively, we need to build an organization in which there is a context in which to manage the inevitable conflict that arises between volunteers and professionals. If we are serious about creating a culture in which collaboration between volunteers and professionals is embraced as an organizational core value, we must begin with a recognition of a fundamental truth of organizational effectiveness. Namely, that none of us is as smart as all of us. The reality is, we will never advance more effective volunteer-staff relationships if we are not convinced of the value of collaboration and if we are not prepared to build systems in which collaboration is de rigueur, it's standard fare between professionals. Some have big development teams, some only a 1-person development team, and their corresponding volunteer partners. If deep down, and even though that door is not closed, let's pretend it is. If deep down, professionals think of volunteer leaders as nothing more than window dressing or ATMs, or as the Harvard Business Review once wrote, as a collection of high-powered people engaged in low-level activities, or correspondingly, if volunteers view their professionals as the hired help, whose primary function is to make them look good or to do the grunt work, then the prospect for meaningful partnership and having an impact are dim. Increasingly in the corporate world, even in the military, and certainly in nonprofit organizations, there is a growing recognition that in the 21st century, no single leader is capable of doing it all or knowing it all. Look, once upon a time, there might have been such a thing as a Renaissance leader. You know, the one who knew everything, who had all the right connections, who had all the answers, but not any longer. Today we don't speak about a Renaissance leader. Today we speak about building Renaissance teams, putting around the table people with a variety of expertise, and by the way, people who don't agree with us. None of us has all the information and skill sets to function effectively by ourselves in a 21st century, highly frenetic, rapidly changing nonprofit environment in which the very nature of philanthropy, as we know, is changing if not day by day, then certainly year by year. This will compel all of us to build teams with a diversity of talents and perspectives. And I'm not simply talking about giving a title to someone. Oh, we'll call him the development chair. You know why? Because he wrote a big check. No, I am talking about really building teams in which we can surround ourselves by those with, and this is hard, just look at the American political environment, in which we surround ourselves by people with different perspectives, different personalities, and expertise. Only if we're prepared to do that can we increase our collective impact. But, as the folks in this room know better than most, collaboration is nuanced. It doesn't mean that board members and executive staff do the same things. Hence the second element required in order for board members and senior executives to have the impact we wish to have and to attract and retain those first-rate professionals and volunteers we were talking about. And that is to build an organization in which there is real clarity regarding expectations and boundaries on both the volunteer side and the professional side. As the great leadership guru Peter Drucker wrote in his wonderful book, Managing the Nonprofit Organization, and by the way, don't worry about when this book was published. It's as new and vibrant today, and if you haven't read it in a while, or if you've never read it, Amazon.com. What Drucker says in Managing the Nonprofit Organization, astoundingly, is to be effective, a nonprofit needs a strong board, no argument, but a board that does the board's work. Indeed. Right. For this to happen, and if there's a takeaway from today's session, hopefully there will be a couple, but one in particular is this. For this to happen, for board members and professionals to achieve the level of clarity regarding expectations and boundaries, then board members and staff must agree on who does what, and that understanding must become a part of the organizational culture. If that understanding changes every single time we get a new chairman of the board or a new president, because, oh, she's got a great new idea, and maybe now the volunteers should do this. Instead of that, we lose in the end. I'm not saying that organizational culture doesn't evolve and change over time. Of course it does. But we cannot put at risk the clarity that we so desperately need if each time we have a change in volunteer leadership or even professional leadership, we are rewriting the rules. As Drucker liked to say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And we need to figure out a way to build that culture into our organizations. And while it sounds daunting, it's not. It takes a lot of work, and it takes a commitment on both sides of the equation, if you will. But it begins with a very simple willingness on the part of the enterprise to distinguish between two discrete yet interdependent functions. The function of management, traditionally the purview of the professionals, and the function of governance, the owners of the organization, traditionally the purview of the board. I once heard a nonprofit organizational leader suggest that the clarity that we need in nonprofit organizations is similar to the clarity found in the aviation industry. Now, this analogy isn't quite perfect, but think about it as a useful teaching tool for your staffs, for your boards. In this analogy, volunteer leaders are the air traffic controllers. It is their job to see the big picture, to control the variables, to outline the overall policies, and to protect the long-term interests of the enterprise. But professionals are the pilots. Once clearance has been given, it's their job to fly the plane without micromanagement from the tower and to make a variety of key decisions, sometimes in consultation with that tower, other times not. In organizational life, achieving such clarity will depend on our institution's ability to create a system that in whole or in part will look something like this. Governance. The board is in charge of organizational ends. The board is the fiduciary. It is their job to make sure that the enterprise is fiscally stable. It is their job to protect the best interests of the organization as the owners, to set long-term priorities. Fasten your seatbelt. It is their job to supervise one member of the professional team and one member only, and that is to hire, fire, supervise, and evaluate the CEO, or in faith-based organizations that might include the chief spiritual officer as well. And it is the job of governance to constitute and structure itself. That is, to review bylaws periodically, to have a nominating committee that appoints people to the board. But it is the job of management to be in charge of organizational means, to administer the organization, to supervise every member of the professional staff with a professional supervisor, except for the CEO, to be in charge of ongoing operations and programming. Now, some of you in this room are familiar with this. You know that there are several sources and approaches to helping your organization achieve this kind of clarity, from board source to Carver policy governance. I'm happy to share some other opportunities if an organization is really suffering with the absence of clarity in this regard. We should acknowledge that today in sophisticated not-for-profits, these boundaries aren't always rigid. They are sometimes porous. In many cases, CEOs are working with the board to appoint new trustees. And in many cases, programmatic suggestions may come from members of the board. But absent a system-wide clarity regarding all of these matters, a clarity, as I suggested before, that extends from administration to administration, we will never have the impact we want to have. The third element that enables boards and professionals to partner together is a system of regular communication. Now, it's striking to me, I hope this room is the exception, it's striking to me how poorly nonprofit executives and their boards communicate with each other. How often they view each other as the enemy and not as the partner. This is true not only at the CEO level, but at every level of the organization. Maintaining effective communication with your volunteer partners is a conscious act, and it requires work on your part and your partner's part. In my experience, the key to such regular communication is for volunteer and professional partners to willingly and regularly engage in what I call difficult but important conversations. Regularly and willingly. You know, sort of like the way we vote in Chicago. Early and often. There are way more than 6 critical conversations that you and your corresponding partner need to develop. But in my experience, here are some that I know have worked. How wonderful would it be if, as a regular part of the way we work with our partners, we would have a conversation that goes something like this. Here is what you can expect from me, and here is what I need from you. I do put the kids to bed between 7 and 9 o'clock. I'm not going to get to your email until after hours. And by the way, I won't pester you. But when I call you, it would be great to either get a 24-hour response within 24 hours, or to know that you're out of town, you're on a special case, you're on a project, and you can't. The ability to say, here's what I need to do my job, and you need to tell me the same so that we can work on that. The second difficult but important conversation I'd like to see us have is taking a page out of the former mayor of New York, Ed Koch, who used to walk around the streets of New York City and say, how am I doing? I believe we should be having the how are we doing conversation with our volunteer partners early and often. Are you in fact getting what you need from me? Are we achieving the impact that we said we wanted to? What should we be tweaking? We're not the enemy, we're partners. How's this working? What do you want to accomplish? What impact do you want to have? Do you know that so many times people rise through the chairs of an organization to become the chair of the board, the head of the development committee, and we never say to them, what do you want to accomplish? What is the impact you want to have? And after years of doing this, you know what I found out? Volunteers are willing to ask me the same question. Not to treat me just as a box on the org chart, but to say to me, you've been doing this for a while. What is the impact you want to have? Other difficult but important conversations I'd love to see us have with our partners. What do we need to communicate about? Between the two of us, we go to hundreds of meetings. There's no way I can fill you in on every meeting or you fill me in, but there darn well are things we better not let slip through the cracks. What are the things we need to communicate about? And even more granularly than that, what are the best ways for us to communicate? Do you prefer I text you in the morning? Should I wait till evening to send you emails? You're a hardworking volunteer. I am not embarrassed to stand in front of you to tell you that I had a development chairman with whom I worked for several weeks before I found out that she never set up voicemail on her cell phone. I'd be calling and calling with messages, leaving a message with a mechanical voice, and she never knew she had voicemail on her cell phone. She never bothered to check. For some, that's about setting a Monday morning meeting or a coffee on Friday afternoon. For some, it's about making sure we meet before the development committee meets to go over agenda. What are the best ways for us to communicate? And finally, I would suggest, not really finally, but finally for this presentation, a difficult but important conversation is what happens when we disagree, as we inevitably will. How do we play out our policy differences? Right? We're bringing that to the table at a development committee meeting. We're working it out in partnership beforehand. The issue of how we disagree is a segue, very briefly, to our last item, which is the ability to create a context in which to manage conflict. Now here I'm going to say some things that might be counterintuitive, but critical to creating healthy volunteer professional relations is an embrace of conflict as a vital component of the process. Volunteers and professionals will disagree. I know most of you figured that out by now, but I'm suggesting that's not a bad thing. Here we must begin with a willingness to recognize that in the work that we do, conflict between partners is inevitable. Professionals are professionals. We have our own perspective, we have our own experiences, but so do our volunteer partners. They come to the table with their own experiences, right? The challenge for us is not to build a conflict-free environment. That's unreasonable, and truth be told, it's bad for business. The academic evidence is that conflict-free environments stifle creativity. They don't unpack serious differences in policy and approach. Volunteer leaders and professionals do not always see things the same way, and I'm suggesting we ought to treasure those differences of opinion if we're serious about being valued and about valuing our volunteer partners. Nonprofit organizations must avoid what I call worshiping at the altar of consensus. Now, I've been in this business a long time, same as many of you. Looking around these tables longer than many of you too, I'm sorry to say. This hair was full once. In nonprofit organizations, we all understand we need consensus. Why? Because we're fundraising enterprises, and we operate with a single rule: tick off the fewest amount of people, the least amount of time. But that's all we do. And so of course, there's an embrace of consensus. But I stand in front of you to suggest that we ought not rush to resolve disagreements. We ought not rush to ignore them, to brush them under the rug, because you know what? They don't go away under the rug. They just become these impediments to smooth sailing going forward. If you want to build healthy relations between board members and their professionals, the trick is not to avoid conflict, but to embrace it and then manage it. Consider the wisdom of the CEO of General Motors, Albert Sloan Jr., who used to tell his people, I propose we postpone further discussion to give ourselves time to develop disagreement and perhaps gain some understanding of what the decision is all about. Or, as the journalist Herbert Bayard Swope said, I cannot give you the formula for success, but I can give you the formula for failure, which is try to please everybody. Of course we worship at consensus. We need consensus. But when we rush too quickly to pretend everybody's holding hands and singing Kumbaya, then we often fail to uncover real critical, creative suggestions, alternate approaches. My friends and colleagues, beware of walking into any room and any meeting that begins, we have 2 choices. No, maybe we have 3 choices. Maybe we have 6 choices. And before we rush to achieve consensus, and we'll get there, we need to explore those disagreements. I'm going to finish by giving the last word to Peter Drucker. The first rule in decision making is that one does not make a decision unless there is disagreement. If you have a consensus on an important matter, again, we're not talking about floral arrangements or napkin colors. We're talking about deep gut issues. If you have consensus on an important matter, don't make the decision, said Drucker. Adjourn so that everybody has a little time to think. Important decisions are risky, but think about the organizations represented around these tables. We are in the business of having an impact, which often means we make important, big, risky decisions. Says Drucker, they should be controversial. Acclamation means that nobody has done the homework. So I would suggest we're not going to fix generations of strained relations between volunteers and professionals overnight, but I would say that if we are willing to embrace collaboration as an organizational core value, not just mouth about it, but to really live it, if we are willing in partnership with our volunteers or our professionals to create clarity about expectations and boundaries for both the volunteer and the professional, and to have that become part of the culture, not to be like a weather vane that changes every time we get a new board chair. If we are willing to institute systems of regular communication early and often that are transparent, candid, and trusting, and if, as I just suggested, we can, working with our volunteer partners, create a context in which to manage conflict, then I believe we're on our way. Let's take some questions or reactions. Thank you all very much. Any questions or reactions? Thoughts, pushbacks, disagreements? I'm here for a while. I have some business cards if anybody wants to stay in touch. I look forward to it. Yes, please.
A lot of the organizations here and whatnot are well-established, old-standing organizations. I'm from an organization that is only 5 years old, and we have not had a long background of conflict or anything in our board because, quite truthfully, not a lot of us know what's going on anyway. At what point...
I'm not sure that's a formula that you want to win with, but...
Yeah. At what point should you start, or could you start, or I don't want to say kicking in your heels or wanting to change the way things are going on, but at what point in maturity of a board, or is there a particular point before you start embracing differences or whatever terminology we want to use?
Look, first the IRS helps us by answering that question. No, we to be a nonprofit, and Lisa, you remember we were talking about possibly talking with a group of people about who are social innovators. You know, one-person operators who have great vision and they can't even fathom how to work with a board at all because they've got a dream and they're zealous. So, but the IRS requires us to have boards. Our job with a key champion and as professionals is to make sure we're populating those boards with a diversity of perspectives and skill sets. Peter Drucker, who I quote often, had a great expression. He said that carbon copies are weak. Now there are some of you in the room that don't even get the reference to carbon paper, which was really, Google it. But carbon copies are weak. And so part of our job, especially if we're in an embryonic, a nascent 501c3, is to make sure we are building a variety of perspectives and worldviews, different professional skill sets, gender balance. You know, it depends on the organization. What are the representational issues? But if you're part of a new nonprofit, this work becomes that much more essential. So there's not a date certain. You know, after 24 months, you should be fighting with each other. I don't mean that, right? But I do think we grow with a diversity of people. We'll never raise the money we need to if everybody looks alike, sounds alike, cares alike. You know, the fundraisers in the room will be the first to tell us that depresses giving, right? If everybody is of the same. So I'm happy to speak afterwards, seriously, because I know we have to adjourn. But I'm a big advocate for managing conflict, but by building into the system diversity of talents and perspectives and skill sets as close to the beginning as you can possibly do. Alex?
I just want to make two mechanical observations for myself, and maybe you will agree with me. I think we have just experienced a master class in two areas. One, how a speaker can be loud enough to be heard, and he yelled most of the time, but he accomplished that. And the second, this is the best use of PowerPoint I have ever experienced.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, we all took the same seminar about don't repeat on the PowerPoint. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Hal, I just want to thank you on behalf of our organization for being here and honoring our time and your time. But we really hope you'll be engaged with us and be a resource for us and
It'll be an honor. Thank
spend more time in the mountains than in Chicago.
you. You don't have to tell me twice.
All right, so we'll see you
Thank
next
you
month.
all.
Thank you.